Interesting how a child struggling to breathe was totally ignored until a number appeared on the screen. If policy was the issue, why did the doctor suddenly change his entire tone afterwards?
No payment, no treatment. Take your son out. The doctor didn't even raise his voice when he said it. He just stared at the monitor like my 6-year-old gasping for air in front of him was an inconvenience on his schedule. For a second, I couldn't move. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped Eli's inhaler, the empty one I'd already used twice on the drive here. His fingers were digging into my sleeve, tiny chest rising too fast, too shallow. We were in a crowded emergency room at nearly midnight, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, people pretending not to watch while my son struggled to breathe 3 feet from a doctor who had already decided money mattered more. I opened my mouth to beg again, then something changed. Not with me, with him. His eyes flicked down to the screen. A notification flashed across his monitor and all the color drained from his face. That was the moment I realized maybe he hadn't looked closely enough at who I was. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The room was still loud, phones ringing behind the reception desk, carts rolling somewhere deeper in the hallway, a baby crying 2 chairs away, but somehow everything around me narrowed to one thing. Dr. Marcus Hale was staring at his screen like it had just personally offended him. Not shocked, not confused, alarmed. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then he clicked something so quickly I almost missed it, his posture straightening as if he could physically hide whatever he'd just seen. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, suddenly looking at Eli for the first time. The shift was so abrupt it made me pause. 5 seconds ago, my son was apparently someone I should take elsewhere. Now he was worth eye contact. I tightened my grip on Eli and studied the doctor carefully. "My son can't breathe," I said, calmer than I felt. "That was the issue a minute ago, too." A few people nearby looked up from their phones. The receptionist, young, nervous, maybe early 20s, glanced between me and Dr. Hale like she knew something had gone wrong but didn't understand what. Karen Doyle, the billing supervisor who had just threatened to call security, stepped closer to his station. "What happened?" she asked under her breath. Dr. Hale angled the monitor away from her. "Nothing," he said too quickly. That was the first real inconsistency. People who are in control don't usually scramble. Eli coughed hard against my arm, shoulders tightening as he tried to pull in air that wasn't there. The sound snapped me back into the only thing that actually mattered. "Either treat him now," I said, "or tell me clearly in front of everyone here that you're refusing emergency care to a child in respiratory distress." Karen's expression changed. Not guilt, calculation. She lowered her voice. "Ma'am, threatening staff is not helping your case." I almost laughed at that. Threatening. As if asking for oxygen was suddenly aggressive behavior. My phone buzzed in my pocket again. Same number. Attorney Wells. 3rd missed call in less than 20 minutes. I ignored it. Not because I didn't care, but because whatever he wanted could wait until my son was breathing normally again. Dr. Hale was still watching me now, but differently. Not dismissive anymore. Evaluating. Like he was trying to place something he should have recognized sooner. Then his eyes dropped briefly to the chart in front of him. "To confirm," he said carefully, "your full name is Rose Bennett?" There it was. Not insurance information. Not payment method. Not even my son's medical history. Just my name. Something cold settled in my stomach. Because suddenly, this wasn't only about unpaid treatment anymore. And judging by the way Karen went pale after glancing at his screen, they had just realized something I still didn't fully understand. Then Karen leaned toward him and whispered one sentence that changed everything. "Why is her file restricted?" "Repeat your name for me?" Karen's voice was quieter this time, stripped of the confidence she'd had 5 minutes earlier when she was telling me to leave. I shifted Eli higher against my shoulder. His breathing was still uneven, but at least Dr. Hale had stopped pretending he wasn't there. A nurse had quietly brought over a pulse oximeter and clipped it to Eli's finger without being asked. No one had given permission for that, which meant the room was already changing. Rose Bennett, I repeated. Karen nodded once, like she was checking a detail against something only she could see. A few hours earlier, none of this was supposed to happen. I had been halfway through my shift when Eli's school nurse called me. She kept her voice calm, which somehow made it worse. Rose, Eli's having trouble breathing again. That was all I needed to hear. I left work immediately, drove across town with Eli wheezing in the back seat, and used the last of his rescue inhaler at a red light 3 blocks from the hospital. There had been no time to think about paperwork, no time to check if my insurance issue had been resolved. Just get him here. That was the plan. A simple one. Until apparently money became more urgent than oxygen. At the desk, the young receptionist was still staring at her screen. Earlier, when I first gave my information, she had frowned slightly, then typed it again, then looked at me, not with judgment, with confusion, like something on her system didn't match the woman standing in front of her. I noticed it then. I noticed things. Is there a problem? I had asked. She opened her mouth, but Karen stepped in before she could answer. No issue, Karen had said. We just need payment authorization. Now that same receptionist looked even more unsettled. She leaned toward Karen and whispered something I couldn't hear. Karen stiffened. My phone buzzed again. Attorney Wells, 4th call, still unanswered. Dr. Hale folded his arms, trying to reclaim whatever authority had slipped from him. But his eyes kept drifting back to the monitor. Not to Eli, to the screen. That told me everything. Whatever changed wasn't medical. It was administrative. And somehow, it involved me. Then Karen looked up at me again, forcing a polite smile that hadn't existed before. Ms. Bennett, she said carefully, is there anyone we should be contacting on your behalf? That question made no sense, unless they had just discovered I wasn't who they thought I was. And somehow, neither was the situation. Answer the question. Dr. Hale's tone had sharpened again, but it no longer carried the same certainty. That was the difference. A few minutes ago, he had all the leverage, hospital badge, authority, policy, staff backing him up. Now he sounded like a man trying to regain control of a conversation that had already moved beyond him. I adjusted Eli in my arms. His pulse ox monitor blinked softly, and the nurse standing nearby avoided eye contact with everyone. Who exactly are you asking me to call? I asked. Karen and Dr. Hale exchanged a look. Not a casual one. A silent calculation. The waiting room had become noticeably quieter. A teenager across from me was openly recording now, phone angled just enough to pretend he wasn't. Good. Let people see this clearly. Karen folded her hands together. We're just trying to understand if there's someone assisting you. With what? I asked. Her smile tightened. Interesting. Because nobody asks vague questions when they're comfortable. Eli let out another rough cough, and his body sagged slightly against me. That got everyone's attention. The nurse stepped forward instinctively. His oxygen's dropping. Dr. Hale hesitated. Actually hesitated. A doctor standing over a struggling child, calculating consequences in real time. He wasn't powerful. He was cornered. Take him back, the nurse said, more firmly now. Dr. Hale ignored her. Instead, he clicked rapidly through something on his screen, face hardening as he read. Then Karen's computer chimed. A new notification. She looked down, and all the color left her face. Not subtle concern, not confusion, pure recognition. Her hand immediately covered part of the screen, but not before I caught a single line reflected faintly in the glass divider beside her station. Priority contact. Estate authorization active. Estate. That word landed strangely, because I had only started hearing that word repeatedly this week, after my father died. Attorney Wells had used it in nearly every conversation. Documents. Authorization. Temporary review. At the time, none of it felt urgent compared to funeral arrangements and keeping Eli's routine stable.
Notice how this stopped being about unpaid treatment the second the notification appeared. If this were only billing, why hide the screen?
Now, suddenly, in the middle of an emergency room, that same word was triggering visible panic. Karen stood up so abruptly her chair rolled backward. That question hit the room harder than anyone expected. Not because of what was asked, because of who asked it. The man was older, maybe late 50s, silver hair, hospital ID clipped neatly to his blazer. Not rushed in the chaotic way most people in emergency departments move. Deliberate, controlled, which somehow made him more intimidating. Dr. Hale straightened immediately. We were in the process of evaluating the situation. It was a clean answer, technically polished, also completely false. The administrator looked at Eli, then at the pulse oximeter now clipped to his finger, then back at Dr. Hale. In the process, he repeated, no raised voice, no visible anger, just enough silence afterward to make everyone uncomfortable. Karen stepped in, trying to recover ground. There was an insurance complication. Interesting phrasing, not lack of payment, not patient refusal, just complication. The language was changing now that accountability had entered the room. The administrator ignored her. Instead, he turned to me directly. Ms. Bennett, I'm Daniel Mercer. I oversee operations for this facility. Not billing, not patient relations. Operations. A very specific title to appear this quickly. I'm sorry for the delay, he said. Delay. Another carefully selected word. Not refusal, not denial. I noticed all of it. Because when people begin revising language in real time, they're usually reacting to risk. A nurse finally stepped forward with a wheelchair. We need to move him now. This time, no one stopped her. As Eli was wheeled toward the treatment area, I followed, but Mercer gently paused me. One moment, please. He lowered his voice. Your father was Thomas Bennett? That caught me off guard. Not because it was incorrect, because no one here should have known that mattered. Yes, I answered. Mercer nodded once, as though confirming the final piece of something. Behind him, I saw Dr. Hale visibly tense. That was when I understood something important. They weren't trying to figure out whether I could pay. They were trying to figure out what exactly had just been triggered. Mercer glanced at the sealed envelope still visible inside my bag. You have the documents with you. Not a question, a statement. I looked down at the envelope. Cream-colored. Legal seal still intact. Attorney Wells had insisted I keep it with me until he could explain everything in person. I hadn't even opened it. Not once. Not after the funeral. Not after the endless calls. Not after tonight. Now suddenly, every person in this room seemed more interested in that envelope than in anything else. Mercer leaned slightly closer, voice barely above a whisper. Do you understand what event your visit just activated? I stared at him. No, I didn't. But judging by the expression on Dr. Hale's face, he absolutely did. By that point, Eli had finally been taken through the double doors and into treatment. A respiratory nurse was already fitting him with oxygen by the time I caught one last glimpse of him disappearing down the hallway. Only then did my body register how exhausted I was. Not emotional exhaustion, physical. The kind that comes after holding yourself together for too long because falling apart would have been inefficient. Daniel Mercer motioned toward a quieter section near the nurse's station. We need to speak privately. Behind us, Dr. Hale was no longer pretending to be in charge of anything. He stood rigid beside his workstation while Karen whispered frantically into a phone. Containment mode. Exactly what I suspected. Mercer looked at the sealed envelope in my hand. You should open it now. So I did. The seal broke cleanly. Inside were several notarized documents, a letter, and a card with Attorney Wells' direct number. At the top of the first page, Conditional Estate Oversight Authorization. I scanned the first paragraph, and suddenly the fragmented conversations from the last few days started making sense. My father hadn't just worked occasional donor events at this hospital. He had spent years as a legal advisor and personal representative for a private philanthropist named Arthur Voss, a man I vaguely remembered meeting once as a teenager. According to the documents, Voss had established a donor compliance fund tied specifically to emergency treatment ethics. After his own child experienced delayed care years ago, he funded a monitored emergency access program. quietly, strategically, and with one unusual condition. If any flagged patient tied to designated oversight records was denied or delayed emergency stabilization based on payment barriers, a financial trigger would activate automatically. A monitored escrow transfer, immediate legal review, public audit eligibility, amount, $500,000. That was the notification Dr. Hale had seen. Not money sent to him, not random wealth appearing out of nowhere. A triggered compliance transfer, proof that an event serious enough to activate donor oversight had just occurred, in front of witnesses, on record, time-stamped. I looked up slowly. So they weren't reacting to money, I said. Mercer gave a tight nod. They were reacting to exposure. Not because it was surprising, because it confirmed exactly how preventable this entire situation had been. If they had simply treated my son like a patient instead of a financial inconvenience, none of this would have happened. Dr. Hale approached us, posture far less certain than before. Ms. Bennett, I want to clarify that there appears to have been a misunderstanding. No, I interrupted. There was a decision. He stopped talking. That was the most satisfying silence of the night. Mercer turned to hospital security. Escort Dr. Hale to administration. Karen's badge was collected minutes later. No dramatic meltdown, no shouting, just consequences arriving with professional efficiency. By morning, internal review had already begun. By afternoon, Attorney Wells finally reached me in person, and by the next day, local reporters were calling the hospital. Eli recovered fully after overnight monitoring. When I sat beside his bed the next morning, he looked small again, normal, safe, like the night had finally released him. Attorney Wells sat across from me and explained the rest. The donor fund would now trigger a broader compliance investigation, and as temporary estate representative connected through my father's transition files, I had authority to review next steps, including legal action. A nurse came in quietly to check Eli's chart, noticeably polite, careful, respectful. Amazing how quickly systems become efficient when accountability enters the room. Before leaving, I passed the same reception desk where Karen had first told me to take my son elsewhere. Now, no one could quite meet my eyes. They thought I was just another mother who couldn't pay. That was their first mistake. Their second was assuming nobody important was watching. And somewhere between those two mistakes, they accidentally exposed themselves.
Situations like this usually look simple until one overlooked detail changes the entire frame. Makes you wonder how many other stories are being misunderstood in real life, doesn't it?